I'm Hannah. I'm so excited to be here. I want to start off by sharing with you guys one true thing about myself. My mother used to tell me that the start to any great story was with one true thing, and then another true thing, and then another true thing. And soon enough, that story of yours will be sitting on the outside of you. And so one true thing about me is that 8 years ago, I made a pretty deep-rooted promise to myself that I was never going to get up on a stage again, which is always ironic when I find myself in spots like this. But I had been a dancer for 10 years. I would be on stage 6, 7, 8 times per weekend. It never fazed me, it never bothered me. And then one day, out of nowhere, I was getting to the cusp of the stage, and all of a sudden I started to panic. I started to have all these doubts, and you were gonna forget all of the steps. You're gonna mess up this dance. You're not gonna be able to breathe. And that panic didn't go away. And I ruined a lot of dances that way until I did the only thing I could think of when I was 17 years old. I quit. And I made that promise to myself that I was never going to get up on a stage, not to sing, not to dance, not to speak. Well, several years ago, I was contacted by TED.com. They told me I was a finalist for their global talent search, that I needed to show up to New York City on this specific date and deliver a TED Talk in front of 250 to 300 past TED speakers who were going to rate me. Awesome, right? So I show up, they're miking me up, I'm warning them I might be the first TED speaker in all of TED history to vomit, so if that happens, please graciously edit it out. And I got up on stage, and this strange sort of peace met me. And it was absolutely the best night of my life. And I don't say that because I got to give a TED Talk. I say that because I learned something that night that I carry with me still today. That at some point, we have to be willing to set an expiration date for how long we want to limit ourselves. At some point, we have to be willing to gather up the fears and the doubts and the perceived inadequacies about ourselves and find a place for them on the back burner so that we can go out there and be who the world needs us to be. Because a lot of times, it is the things we say we can't do, we won't do, we couldn't possibly put ourselves into that position, that are the things that we're actually called to do. So another true thing about me is that in these kinds of settings, I like to imagine that the walls are a little bit more closed in, the lights are a little bit more dim, we all have cups of coffee in between our hands. I love coffee shops, that's no surprise. And we are just gonna spend the afternoon sharing stories, and I'm just the girl who has to go first. And the truth in that is that I have never been nervous to share a story. I am a girl who got way too many stories stuck in her bones. I always wanna know where you're going and why he's leaving when the two of you are coming back together. My friends would say I'm the one most likely to get into the white van offering free candy because I think there's some kind of story in that. And this is just precursor to y'all. Like, I don't know how to play in the kiddie pool when it comes to this sort of stuff. So like, I go Titanic deep like within the first 5 minutes, and there's no recovering. So like, if you want to weep, I'll weep with you. But yeah, so I don't say story because it's become some buzzword in our society today, and I'm sure you've heard that. You have a story to share, put your story out there. I think we might finally just be looking up, looking around and realizing stories are one of the few things in this lifetime that we actually get to keep. That relationships fail us, friendships fall out from underneath us, people come and go into our lives so quickly, and stories are one of those few things that we can grab onto, that we can clutch, we can carry, and we can pass on. And in a world where everything is becoming increasingly more digital, it's ultimately the proof that we were here. That we lived, that we loved, that we tried, that we danced, that it was hard, but it was worth it, that we were definitely here. And I think that's all the more reason to figure out how to turn our stories into lights and into lanterns and into lampposts for other people, to shine a light on where you've been and where somebody else could go. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I promise you guys I will not jam any kinds of stats or numbers down your throat simply because, 1, math is not my jam, 2, because I learned very quickly several years ago that stats and statistics, that's the same thing. See, I'm not good at math. Fly out the window when you are knee-deep and muddy in the business of broken hearts. That's what I tell people I do on a daily basis. I run a global organization called More Love Letters. We use the power behind social media to write and mail letters to strangers in need all over the world. You can go on the site, you can nominate friends and family going through something tough. We pick 8 to 10 stories that we put up online every 2 to 3 weeks, and we have a community of people all over the world pouring in letters. Hundreds and hundreds of letters showing up for a person on a day when they think they're not gonna get any mail. We don't handle, some of you might be thinking, like, well, what kinds of stories are these? Or like, are these romantic, mushy-gushy love letters? And I swear it's none of that. It's simply reminders to people, like, hey, thanks for getting up today. Thanks for rolling over, putting 2 feet on the ground, and going out to face the world, because we all know how hard that can be. These are the kinds of letters that we gift people with, young and old. It is by far the greatest gift of my life, but I can't stand up here and say it because I had a really great 5-year plan. I simply found something that was so much bigger than my body. I went out on a limb, I gathered a lot of courage, and I just set out to see what would happen. So the name of the presentation is called I Was Here, but this is kind of a quote that I want us to just kind of keep pocket in our back pockets. It's from a recent article in the New York Times, but it was on Dorothy Day, and it just said she made unshakable commitments in all directions, kind of serving as what we're going to get into when I talk about legacy, when I talk about leadership, when I talk about you guys and the roles that you're in, and how we gear those roles up for success for whoever is going to walk into them, but how you guys can root yourself into a life that matters. But so, this presentation was inspired by another presentation that I was working on, and I had a whole presentation written out, and then I scrapped the whole thing and went in a completely different direction. Anybody who's a creative in the room knows that feeling. You do one thing, you get completely sidetracked, and you have to start over. And so I will set the scene for what happened to you guys, for what happened to me. It was a Friday afternoon. I was getting to the end of my workday, and it was the time when you're like, I can't really start another project, so like I'm just gonna close out for the day. I'm just gonna go onto Facebook because everything encouraging happens on Facebook, right? Today it's more like Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it is, but it was Facebook at the time, and wanted to see who was posting more pictures of their cats that day, or who got engaged in the middle of the workday. So I get onto Facebook, and I make the mistake of clicking into one of those 30-minute long viral wedding proposals. Has anybody seen these before? Yes. Anybody who has one of these, I am not knocking on you. It's beautiful. But so I'm watching this thing, and literally, there's no mascara left on my face. And no one has ever seen these things. It is the most extravagant proposal you could ever imagine. It's your 90-year-old grandfather's coming out behind a tree, dancing to One Direction. All the orphans that you ever taught overseas are on a screen in the back being you're about to get married. There's love letters strewn across the beach, and the person's picking it up, and it's all leading up to this one moment where somebody gets down on one knee and asks somebody, will you spend the rest of your life with me? So like I said, I am a train wreck in this moment, crying my eyes out, thinking, A, is this even real? B, has anybody ever loved me in my life? And 5 minutes later, I forget about it. I move on. It falls into the vault that I'm certain all of us have inside of us, where all the other viral videos go. Sitting right next to Charlie, who bit my finger, and the moment you figured out what the fox said, and life just clicked. And then there's a story that I learned several years ago about a woman I grew up hearing about my whole entire life, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Is anybody familiar with her, Mother Teresa? Yeah, she's pretty commonplace, right? She's here with us. So, well, she's not really. Okay. So, what I didn't know about Mother Teresa is that she actually had really mangled feet at the end of her life. Did anybody know this about her feet? A few people knew. Yeah, feet were ratchet, and you're not even allowed to say the two in the same sentence, so I apologize. Mother Teresa, okay. So, she had these really decrepit feet at the end of her life, and the truth in that is that when the shipments of shoes would come into Calcutta, she would take all of the shoes and she would disperse them outward to whoever needed them. Size 7 over there, size 3 over there, size 6 over there, and whatever was left, she would wear them. So it didn't matter if the shoes didn't fit her feet. She couldn't go barefoot on the streets. And so as a result of wearing shoes for so long that didn't fit her, her feet were deformed by the end of her life. And I remember hearing this story and thinking to myself, what is that? What is that inside of a person that makes them willing to be so uncomfortable just so that another person will be better off? So we have 2 stories here. One that keeps us full for 5 minutes and we forget about it. And another story that almost becomes like a second skin to us. We can't forget it if we try, because it reminds us of the type of person we said we wanted to be like. And I know within the culture we live in, it sometimes feels like we're just standing in the middle of those 2 stories. And I'm only 27, so I don't get to stand up here and say I have the secret to life. I don't really know what it is. But I do have to believe that a lot of the stuff in this lifetime that's actually worth it has nothing to do with virality, fireworks, big, grand proposals. It has to do with how far we are willing to go and stretch and do to show up for somebody who is standing on the other side of this. So I moved to New York City, or I moved to Atlanta, Georgia about a year ago, and before I moved to Atlanta, I was living in New Haven, Connecticut. I had this particular Starbucks that I would go to all the time to plug in and do my work, and anybody from New England, you know, if you're in the zone, you're in the zone. You got your headphones on, like, don't talk to me, like, create that little bubble. But one day this man came up to me, and he would soon be known as Starbucks Joe. And he came right up to me, and he started talking to me, and he immediately asked me, what is it that you love? And I'm thinking to myself, no one ever asks that question. We think, like, what do you do? And let me assign value to you from there. But so he asked me, what do you love? And I'm immediately like, I love words. I love nouns. I love verbs. If there had been a way to take a semicolon to the senior prom, I would have done it. And I double back and I asked him, what do you love, Joe? And he said, I love math. And I'm thinking to myself, like, something inside of me is dying right now. Everybody knows I can't do math. And before I can even say anything, he is taking my notebook, pulling it across the table, and scribbling a math problem down inside of it. And he pushes it back over to me and he says, what is the answer to that problem? And it's fractions, so I immediately say, I don't know. And he goes, that. That is the reason why I love math. If I were to ask you what is the capital of Arizona, and you didn't know, and you couldn't phone a friend, and you couldn't Google it, you would have to tell me, I don't know. But I have given you everything you need right here to solve this problem. And so the answer is never, I don't know. It is simply, I don't know yet. It's deep, Starbucks, 10 a.m. And he left me with this math problem, and I kept thinking, like, that's like all of us. We get so consumed with thinking that we are missing pieces, that we have to go out and search for them to pull them back in, that we have to go on some eat, pray, love journey just to find ourselves. We forget where to look. We live in a world of social media where I know that you've probably been there before you know it, you are like 67 profiles deep into a person you don't even know, and you're like 77 weeks down, being careful not to double tap the photo. You're like, I don't even know, I don't even know who they are. Like, you've probably been in that before, and I wish that I could stand up here and say it's because we're really inspired by one another. No, that's not true. A lot of times it's comparison. She managed to have it better than me, and that one got the guy, or that leadership position should have been mine, and we're just comparing ourselves and running ourselves on empty. Now, there is this amazing article that I think should be required reading for everyone if you haven't read it before. It's called The Moral Bucket List by David Brooks. It is a New York Times article that came out several months ago, and like, it should be mandatory reading for all humans. Like, when they're born, and when they're 5, and when they're 10, and when they're 15, and graduating college, and all of that. But so it's this beautiful, poignant article on him realizing, like, I invested so much in my resume and so much in how I could build myself up, and then I realized, like, what if leaving a legacy is not about that? What if living life is not about that? And he talks a lot about resume virtues versus eulogy virtues. And he talked about how, we work so hard to make ourselves marketable, and at the same time, we forget to pay attention to one another, to look up from the screen, to invest in our character instead of a character count. I think it's so easy to just build this exterior life of what it looks like to live a beautiful life on social media, and we forget to show up for one another, especially in leadership positions. I know I've been in there before. I get a leadership position, and all I'm thinking is, like, how am I going to announce this on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, As opposed to thinking, how am I going to step into that position and leave it better when I actually leave? We get so focused on what this is going to do for ourselves as opposed to how this is going to build us up to be a better character at the end of the day. And so in reading this article that I hope that you guys will go back and read, there were 4 things that I just wanted to touch on briefly about legacy and leadership and places where you can build from in order to build a leadership legacy that lasts. So the first one is community. This one's pretty simple, but it's within your organizations. Instead of always focusing on me, 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 how do we shift from me to we? How do we look around and realize, like, maybe you are a great fit for that position, but how do you employ the help of other people? How do you make people valued within your role so that everyone feels like they are a vital part of that team? Building up community is one of the most important things that you can do within your organization, because there is no worse feeling than the feeling of being a lonely leader, than the feeling of making it to the mountaintop and being all by yourself. Commitment, which is not a sexy word in the world that we live in today, but it is so vital and so necessary. We were talking last night about commitment in 2015 is growing a man bun. Like, that's 2015 commitment. It takes a long time to grow a man bun. I don't know if you guys know. Y'all are familiar with man buns, right? It's like the thing is happening right now. But like, that's commitment, to go through all the stages that get you to a man bun. It's so awkward. I'm the most awkward human ever. I'm looking at Christian, sorry. But a lot of times we realize the commitment level something takes, and our first instinct is like, get me out of that. Like, I wanted this up until it got really hard. And I learned that in the book writing process. Like, the book writing process in a movie looks really beautiful, and like birds are doing your hair, and the coffee's always flowing, and the cute boy's always walking into the coffee shop, and sometimes he does, hold that whoa. But that's not what book writing looked like at the end of the day. It was talking to yourself in a room for 16 hours and realizing you were having really insightful conversations, but they were all with yourself. And forgetting to shower for several days. And all of these things that like probably won't ever make the highlight reel, but like that's when you learn that real commitment is choosing to stay when the rest of the world would like to walk away. Corsin, that'd be 2 words, but it's a hashtag, so it's Corsin. This is specifically from David Brooks' article, and he says, look and find the thing in which you know is your weakness. Identify your weakness. There is nothing more valuable than we could do as leaders than to figure out what we know that we are bad at, what we know is our downfall. Because if we know what our downfall is, and we are actively working to chip that away and make it lose its power, we will become that much more powerful. So if you know that your downfall is pride, or that you know that your downfall is that you have a really big issue delegating things, or you're bad at confrontation or communication, don't throw that in the corner and never talk about it. Expose that. Talk to your leaders about that, so that that weakness, that core sin, has the ability to lose its power, and so you can become that much more of a stronger leader. And the last one is calling. And that is within She's the First, and also within anything that you are going to pursue after college. That we live in a society where it is really, really easy to just grab at anything and just go from there. And I know that you guys have probably experienced that before. But what is your goal? What is your focus? What are you moving towards? What is this leadership position that you are standing in right now going to propel you into? What do you want to move into? Because that is going to guide what you say yes to and what you say no to. And that's going to be a really important question in the years to come, because you'll find you can say yes to absolutely everything. And sometimes saying no is the only way in which the most valuable things are going to come towards you. And that's the calling that you invest in. And so I want to briefly touch on my story, since I realize y'all don't know that much about me. But my story, people would say, began when I was living in New York City, my first year after college, and that is where I actually came across She's the First. So I was working for a human rights NGO at the United Nations, and I thought that was going to be the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, all of it. And I came across Tammy and her team and became a researcher for She's the First right after college. And it was much smaller, so it's like really amazing to see like all of these faces right now. And just, I'm so proud of the She's the First team and how it's grown. But I moved to New York City thinking it was going to be a lot different than what it really was. I found myself getting really lonely, isolated, depressed. I didn't know how to share these thoughts and feelings with my friends and family. And so I did the most rational thing I could think of, and it was totally legitimate. I started writing letters to strangers on the subway, right? Totally normal. So I started picking them out from the crowd, and I would write them letters, and before long I had a bunch of letters in a notebook, and I thought to myself, I'm never going to need these letters again. I just need to do something with them. And so I started ripping the letters out, folding them up, writing on the front of them, if you find this letter, it's for you, and then leaving them across New York City. Also very legitimate and normal. I'm thankful that I did not tell my mom about any of this, because she would have been like, if you're sad, you can just come home. You don't need to leave letters around New York. But I loved it. I leave them in libraries, coffee shops, the delegate seats at the UN. Like, I was all up on that love letter game. And I ended up blogging about it and basically putting a simple question out there to the internet. Do you need a love letter? Just ask. And I never imagined that this tiny question was going to change my life in such radical ways. But overnight, I watched as my inbox filled up with stories from all over the world. Girls being bullied in rural Kansas, boys moving to New City, single mothers in Sacramento that didn't know how to love their own children, all asking me, a 22-year-old girl at the time, to write them a love letter and give them a reason to wait by the mailbox at the end of the day. And so I started writing, and I wrote 100 letters, and I wrote 200 letters, and I wrote 300 letters, and I was getting to the point of 400 letters, and that was when I thought the story was going to be over. It was going to stop. We were going to be done, and we would move on. And honestly, I'm so thankful that I was so surrounded by people who said the story isn't over. The story doesn't end just because you want the story to end. And I think sometimes looking out at a crowd of leaders, like, I would caution you against that moment. That moment where you look around and you realize, like, the story revolves all around you. Because that will be the saddest day if you never learn to let that go and let other people come into the mission that you're carrying. And so I built a website, though I had no experience, and Squarespace was not around. If you're going to build a website in 2015, use Squarespace because it's amazing. And you will get hired for all the jobs because it's like, whoa, they're a professional graphic designer, but Squarespace. But we didn't have that back then, so it was coding and slugging energy drinks and feeling like Mark Zuckerberg, this is Facebook, but it's not. And I put this website out there, and I watched as it flipped my life completely upside down. And I could tell you story after story after story. I could tell you about a husband who had just come home from Afghanistan, and he and his wife were having a really hard time unearthing this thing called conversation. And so she tucked love letters around the house as a way to say, come back to me. Find me when you can. And if I tell you about that story, I have to tell you about the soldier who served 2 terms in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, came home riddled with PTSD. And it was his sister who requested love letters for him. They showed up, and she got a phone call from him on the floor, crying, saying, I've got hundreds of letters surrounding me, and this one act has restored my faith in humanity. And if I tell you that story, I have to tell you my favorite story of a woman named Leona, who after 69 years of holding the hand of her best friend, he let go. He passed away. And it didn't matter how much her grandchildren's laughter filled the air. There were just days when, plain and simple, she missed him, and she wanted him back. And so it was her granddaughter who requested love letters for her, and they showed up right before Christmas. And Leona sat in her favorite chair, and she read every single letter. And then she wheeled her walker into the kitchen, and she announced to the family, I am going to stick around now. I am going to read these letters every single day, and I am going to stick around now. These are just a few of the hundreds of stories that we have come across through More Love Letters. And I get to stand here and not take any credit for it, but just say that I was the crazy one to think that it was too small to make a difference. And I think a lot of us have probably stood in those shoes before. The things that we're doing day after day after day that we think they're too small, no one's going to remember them, this can't possibly make an impact, but what if that is the stuff that people are going to remember years from now, decades from now? We cannot belittle those small steps, because at the end of the day, that is what a story is. And so I want to end with one final story for you guys on legacy leadership, all that you guys are walking into for the year ahead. And so it says drop the mic. It's not really about dropping the mic, but it kind of is. So it was a few years ago that I was doing a speaking engagement, and I was speaking, and I came off stage, and there was a girl who was waiting off stage for me. And she came up and she started talking to me, and she was talking about life and what had happened and what she'd messed up with, and she had struggled with cutting and all of these like very awful things, and she's just going on and on and on, and I just had to grab her by the shoulders, which I've never done before because she was a stranger, so I wasn't grabbing her. But I grabbed her and I just said, "You're okay. You got up today. You're okay." And she immediately just crumbled. She fell into my arms weeping. And I don't know how long we rocked back and forth together, but we were just rocking back and forth, and I was just whispering into her ear, "You're okay. You're okay. You're okay." And I never saw Sarah again. But it was an intern who came to me the other day, and she asked me, "What do you need me to know at the age of 20? And that's where that story of Sarah came back to me. And I knew that I had to share it with you guys, because we're living in a culture that is constantly telling us that we need to drop the mic, right? You're in that culture. And I think sometimes we get so consumed with how to make everything look perfect, how to always say the perfect thing, how to always tell the perfect story. We get so consumed with dropping the mic that we forget the people that are all around us. That we're living in this world that I know that you guys look around and you think, well, that person has all the pieces, and that person has all the pieces, and that person has the relationship, and that person has the home, and that person has what I wanted. And maybe it's not that we are missing pieces at the end of the day, like social media might tell us sometimes. Maybe we're just missing people. Maybe we are missing the Sarahs that desperately need us. And so I wish that I had some big ending to give you guys of how to leave a lasting legacy. But it's really just as simple as this: dropping the mic and putting down the megaphone and looking around at the people that are going to walk into your club and organization this year, and making sure that you see them, and making sure that you go through the hard times with them, that you invest in building them up as leaders, because ultimately those will be the people that will come and stand in your shoes when you let the leadership position go. We don't like to talk about that, like letting go, and you're just about to start your year, so why would I come up here and be like, and then you're going to leave your position? But if we don't face the reality, then like, how truthful are we being? That we've already probably been in the position where we fell in love with a position, and then it was time to let it go. And you were the launching pad for somebody else coming in and taking that thing miles and miles beyond where you started it. And maybe that's the greatest way that we can approach leadership, is by realizing that at one point we are going to step out. And so we need to give everything we have in that moment, whether it is just commitment every single day, whether it is a club that is moving, whether it is an open door policy to let somebody like Sarah come in. But if I can leave you with one final note, it's just, don't miss Sarah. She's going to be the most valuable person that you come across this year, is that person that needs you, that person that needs your insight. They need to know the hard times that you've gone through. So we don't need to sugarcoat it. We don't need to act like we have it all together. We don't even need a highlight reel. We just need to make sure that we pay attention to one another, that we step out into the world being exactly the leaders we're called to be, not faking it, so that we can make sure that people like Sarah don't slip through the cracks. Because we all need that reminder at the end of the day, that no matter what's going to happen, you're okay. You're okay. You got up today, so you're okay. Thank you.